Hi, everybody. Welcome to Habitual Excellence. I'm Mark Graban. Our guest today is Dr. Matt Pollard. He is an emergency physician by background. He's currently a vice president of continuous improvement at Intermountain Healthcare. So, Matt, thank you for joining us here today on the podcast. How are you?
Doing fantastic, and it's great to join you, Mark. Thank you.
Now, is there anything I gave really the briefest of introductions? Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience about your role or your professional background?
That's it in a nutshell. But even though I've had to step away from clinical practice right now because of my full-time responsibilities at Intermountain, I still do identify first as a physician. That's my DNA. That's what I spent my life preparing for. But I several years into practice, found a desire to improve healthcare, to improve the work, and didn't have really a way to get into that. So I started getting involved with continuous improvement, and one thing led to another, and I find myself now working, as you said, as the vice president for continuous improvement at Intermountain, which is a great opportunity. And we're right now, I think we're poised to do some amazing things.
Well, and we'll have a chance to explore that here today. So you talked about this drive to get involved in improvement. Maybe there's two questions that might be interconnected here. What inspired that? And then how did you first get introduced to formal quality improvement methodologies, lean or otherwise?
Yeah, great question. I think that, like many physicians, I was just doing my day-to-day job, and I was getting frustrated, to be honest, with bureaucracy and red tape, and telling me I couldn't do things, in the emergency department setting. For example, I just wanted simple things such as a bedside pregnancy test, and they said no because it has to be in lab. And so I started to get a little frustrated, and I guess that frustration led to an important crossroads for me, or maybe a fork in the road, where I had to decide. I was really frustrated. I considered leaving medicine,
Oh,
and instead of going down that road, I decided, let's see what we can do here. So I got involved in department leadership, found myself ultimately as the department chairman in our busy emergency department of about 60,000 visits or so, for those that know those volumes. And I was just trying these experiments, but I didn't have a methodology. I was known in the hospital as kind of that guy that was just trying to swim upstream a little bit. And it was at that time that one of my current work colleagues, who had come from the automotive industry, his name is Scott Saxton. He and another colleague, Justin Morley, approached me one day and just said, "Hey, would you be interested? We know you like to do improvement. Do you want to learn more about this?" And they took me on a tour of Seattle Children's Hospital and Virginia Mason's, where we still have connections and friendships, particularly at Seattle Children's. And when I went on that visit, my eyes were just opened to what really is possible. I was always that kid that was organizing his socks in a certain way in his drawer and trying to set up my room most efficiently. I didn't know that had a name. And after I came back from that trip, I decided I'm going to jump into this, and part of my career shifted towards process and quality improvement. And I've had the fortune of being tutored by some amazing individuals that have great experience in other industries as well as healthcare. And that fomented my desire to become better educated in this respect. I couldn't go back and change courses and get the experience in these other industries, but I did enjoy the education that I received at the Ohio State University MBOE program, where I was able to dive in for a year and really learn about these systems. And since then, I've really found a satisfying pathway to my career where we're able to help not just individual patients, but through the Intermountain operating model we call it here in our organization, improve healthcare for all of those that we serve. So kind of a non-traditional track, I guess, Mark, to get to where I am now.
So, of the things you talked about there, Matt, one that one dynamic I recognize is it seems you're in that category of people who are sort of intuitive, continuous improvement minded people, or that I think to me continuous improvement is something that everybody can do, but some people have that more natural affinity to it. Like I think of another ER doctor I know, Greg Jacobson, who was very much the same way. Like he was just really driven to not just do the work, but to turn those frustrations into improvements. And his department chair gave him Masaki Imai's book Kaizen. I don't know. Have you ever read?
I have not read that book. I'm familiar with it, but I haven't read it.
But like you were describing, I mean, I'm curious to hear your reflections on, how important was it to be introduced to methodology, to say, okay, well, here's language, here are frameworks that can actually be studied and used and taught.
I actually think that it was pretty important because making the connection in healthcare in particular with physicians and advanced practice providers is crucial. And what I often tell organizations is if you have a plan to implement continuous improvement or lean and you don't have a plan to involve your physicians, then you're going to fall short. Mm-hmm. Because we drive the costs in healthcare. We drive the processes through either the power of the pen or the power now of the computer. And physicians are a particular breed. I'll include myself in that, but we've been taught the scientific framework, the scientific model of improvement. And what I tell physicians when I talk to them about continuous improvement is an A3, for example, is really just like your history and physical. You're just gathering information, understanding what's the current state, deciding what interventions you want to take. You do an experiment, and then you look at the outcomes, and then you repeat it. That's all an A3 is, and that's what a history and physical is. So I think, at least for me, having that framework was important because I was able to help people make that translation into what does this mean for healthcare. And I think that generally it resonates for employees in healthcare as well, because that's kind of how we're trained. That's our background, and having that framework, I think, makes you more efficient at those improvements. Now, I will say that a lot of organizations that have started down this road will focus so much on those tools that they miss the culture piece. And that's where we've gone to great lengths to help people understand this is about culture. Tools can be enablers of a culture, but it's about a system of systems and creating a culture where everybody is engaged. So, but the combination of those, I think, is crucial, Mark.
Yeah. So was it the influence of the mentors that you mentioned or others? Like what helped open your eyes to this idea that it's not just about the tools, but it's about a management system or a culture, or as I think you described it, as an operating system?
Yeah, that was a journey for me personally, because when you're first introduced to these concepts, those that are most readily grasped, I think, are those that you can implement now. Mm-hmm. You can take these tools and you can start making improvements, but those improvements done in isolation only get you so far. And that's one of the key points that we make in our organization is you can't project your way to success. You have to have a strategy. You have to have a way to monitor your progress, a methodology for improvement, a way to close the loop, etc. So I think that for me, I started out, as a lot of people do, just wanting to grasp the shiny object. And then it was through some mentoring, I think, with Scott and others, including Brian Crowell, who's now no longer with our organization, that really helped me understand the culture piece and the importance of a management operating system. And I think as well, I know this is not necessarily just healthcare based, Mark, but when I look at healthcare in general, I think that's the same journey we took. So many organizations early on were using this tool-based approach. Value stream mapping is incredibly sexy and appealing to healthcare organizations as they look at their bottom line. But those projects, once again, they fall short of the entire picture.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned having the chance to visit Seattle Children's and Virginia Mason Medical Center, both also in Seattle, Virginia Mason is. Are there specific things that were impactful? You mentioned, it really opened your eyes. Were they influential in some of this journey of understanding a shift from tools and projects to operating system and culture, or what really impacted you the most from those visits?
I think it was a little bit of all the above, actually. First, to go and hear Lynn Martin, who you probably know, talk about how they're engaging physicians. And at Intermountain Healthcare, we actually have done this really well, and we've standardized care quite well. But even at our best, we still have a long way to go. So hearing him talk about how he was engaging physicians, and then going and seeing what they were doing and watching processes, and as you know, the more that you know with continuous improvement, the more that you don't know. But going to the work site and just seeing the processes happen, and so just being able to stand in that circle and watch a team care for a patient going through an operating room or in the PACU setting, and seeing the individual steps and the point improvements that they had made, all for the sake of quality, was transformational for me. And particularly just to focus on my friends at Seattle Children's a little bit, their Bellevue Surgical Center is fantastic. That's a great learning laboratory. And for me, it's like it put a name to it. So I could say, oh, that's exactly what I was trying to do. I just didn't know that it was called 5S, or that it was called value stream mapping, et cetera. So I think it was just the entire cultural experience, frankly. And we subsequently developed a relationship with Seattle Children's, and I had the privilege of going back there probably a dozen times with different groups as we would onboard them. And each time I went, I learned more. And so I think through that immersive experience, plus the mentoring that I had here with some amazing colleagues, and actually my team right now is amazing as well. They're all very experienced. That has helped me get to the point where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to visit Seattle Children's as an organization a couple of times, and I did get to go to that Bellevue Surgical Center once. And the thing that stands out, maybe you could elaborate on some of this. You mentioned value stream mapping. It's one thing to create the map. It's another thing to use, I think, what are some of the insights that come from looking at the current state, kind of dreaming a bit about an ideal state, and figuring out how closely can we get to that. So the one thing I remember vividly with Bellevue was, I think, them questioning, why do we wheel patients down a long hallway from prep into the operating room, and then wheel them again from the operating room into recovery? If I remember right, it was very directly connected. It was a door, not a hallway, not a long trip. That it wasn't just about efficiency, but I also remember now, and I think this is an important point, especially in healthcare, it wasn't just about efficiency and time savings. It was so the parent could be there with the child until the very end, which is part of the unique dynamics in healthcare, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. They had 2 induction rooms leading to each OR that allowed the parent to be with them right there until the very last minute. And the processes that they had put in to improve safety and maintain a safe environment as well, with a sterile cockpit, for lack of a better term, checklists, and that really resonated with me, probably because of what I do as an emergency physician. It's very procedural based in many instances, and so seeing that is very appealing. But that's seeing that vision of that value stream map as you describe, and thinking, what is that ideal state? It's so fun to do that. I see why people gravitate towards the value stream map, because you can talk about redesigning an entire process, but in their case, they did build that entire building based off of it, which is great.
Yeah. So earlier, you talked about the frustrations upon frustration. You were frustrated with elements of the work, and then it sounds like you were frustrated, understandably so, of being told no when you had an idea that you thought was a good one? And who knows, maybe in other organizations, somebody had suggested, boy, wouldn't it be great if we could connect the induction room to the OR? And they were probably told no for any
Yeah.
long list of reasons that seemed reasonable to somebody. How do you shift the culture? What are you doing to try to shift it from a culture of saying no to suggestions to a culture where people are engaged and we figure out, well, how can we get to yes?
Yeah, I love this topic actually, Mark. This is, I think, a hallmark of a great lean organization. So now that we're several years down the road in our journey at Intermountain Healthcare, if you have a suggestion or you have an idea or there is a roadblock, we now have an idea system, a very robust idea system actually, where anybody in the entire organization can see a problem and suggest an idea. So it's not a suggestion box. Now that this idea goes into an idea system, it's actually part of our operating model. It's part of the key system of daily improvement where teams are expected and actually set goals around the number of ideas that they implement. And we may target those improvements around a specific process. But you go from saying no to people to saying, what great ideas do you have? And sure, sometimes you can't implement everything that they want to do, but that's okay. Let's back that off a little bit and say, well, if we can't do that, what could we do? And break it down into smaller pieces. And it can really get the creative juices flowing. We implement about 55 to 60,000 ideas per year at an Intermountain Healthcare. And we have about 40,000 caregivers. So we have a long way to go, but we're really happy about that. And some of these ideas have been transformational. We have one employee, actually a senior leader, that was running on a treadmill one day that had an idea of, what if we started a pharmaceutical company to produce generic medications for these meds that are always on back order or shortage? And so we did. We created that company. And another idea may be, and this was actually an idea from a physician, I like to tell the story, but an orthopedic surgeon who was frustrated one day. He knew we were doing continuous improvement, and he couldn't get into the hospital from the physician's parking lot after hours because there was no badge reader, so we'd have to walk around. So he just in frustration said to me one day, you're the improvement guy, get a badge reader on that door, and just kind of stormed off. And it's a real problem, right? I mean, that could just be seen as a complaint. But what I like to tell people is that when you hear a complaint, you're just hearing an upside down idea. And so probe a little further, ask them. And in this case, we were able to get a badge reader installed the next day. I took a picture of it on my cell phone and I texted it to him and I said, here's your badge reader. What other great ideas do you have? And his response was, and I wish I had saved this, he said, whoa, you guys are serious about this. So we really can do this? And I'm like, yeah, what other ideas can we work on together? And then you start getting involved with ideas that are more impactful to patient safety and quality. But that's how it starts. I call it taking the pebble out of the shoe. And it isn't someone else taking your pebble out of your shoe, but rather we're doing it together. And it's a great way to engage people. It's so important that our executive team has chosen this as a key performance indicator for the organization as far as implemented ideas.
Yeah. And that willingness and ability to follow up, to kind of prove out to people that, hey, this isn't just talk. Right. Between that and, when I've had a chance to visit Intermountain and seeing, the mechanics of the card that people would be asked to fill out, it was very similar to what they have at Autoleave as a manufacturer and a great company that they are. It comes back to what you were describing earlier around A3 problem solving and scientific thinking. A small Kaizen improvement in a way is a mini A3, where I think, again, it starts with understanding the problem and the current condition, maybe not in as rigorous a way, right? There was no need to go look for the root cause of why there was no badge reader. It's more of a just do it, but it's still structured. And I think what you raised is such a key point. The one trap with suggestion box systems is that the idea comes in We're literally asking people to jump to solutions, and then we say yes or no. And historically, suggestion boxes reject 97% of the ideas that are submitted. Where what you're describing as an idea system, it really starts with that, okay, what's the problem we're trying to solve? I was wondering if you can share an example, because I think you were alluding to this. If we have to say no, we keep working at it. Can you think of a case where, let's say, the original idea wasn't workable, or it was too expensive, or you found a better way of addressing the underlying problem?
Yeah, it happens every day. And we implement on average, 200 plus ideas a day, and you can't do everything that comes in. For example, a common one with physicians that are struggling with an electronic medical record is, I saved an idea card that was submitted by a physician once that says, my idea is get a new EMR, get a new electronic medical record.
Yeah.
It's like, okay. Right. So what's the problem? I followed up with that physician, and I asked him if I could just ask them a few questions about their workflow. And the biggest pain point or constraint was the way that they were doing their documentation at the end of the day with their dictations. And they weren't using a tool that we call Dragon, just the voice recognition software very efficiently with templates and things like that. And just spending a few minutes with them, helping them understand those pieces of, okay, we can't change the EMR, but what can we do? Where's your biggest pain point? Okay, let's look at that, break it down. Okay, we can implement some changes. And then they start to realize, great, we can't do everything at one one step, but what can we do? And there are so many different examples of how that happens. And actually, I think those are the best ones, because those are the ones that force you to kind of break down the process and think outside the box a little bit. You don't have to implement the idea as stated. As a matter of fact, sometimes that's not the best countermeasure. Right. But they're identifying a problem for you that as a team, you can use the team-based problem solving to come up with perhaps the best solution, and still give credit to the caregiver or employee that brought up the idea, but use a team approach to solve it. It's very engaging.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know, you've probably heard the expression that I wish leaders wouldn't use. Don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. You're probably of the camp that says bringing me problems is okay.
Yeah, it takes actually some practice, doesn't it? And that's the culture shift. It takes time, for example, for teams to be comfortable bringing up mistakes. Mm-hmm. Especially with in healthcare, right? We're dealing with people, and so if we create an environment where every time an employee brings up a mistake, and we come down hard on them, they're not going to bring up more mistakes in the future. I mean, it seems so basic, but this has been how we've handled it in healthcare. And I give credit to we have a team, the Office of Patient Experience, we call them. Where they're really trying to flip that on its head and create an environment where everyone feels comfortable bringing up these problems. And now we're entering into this new phase of the operating model implementation where, we're in this detection phase still. So the way we find out about the problems is by monitoring the events. We need to get upstream. Mm-hmm. But now we're able to use these events because people are feeling safer bringing these up. We can do good root cause analyses with these and try to implement some permanent corrective countermeasures that will root out the problem once and for all. And so we're trying this year actually to implement some of these systems that will enable a higher reliability across the organization.
Yeah. So when you talk about outcomes around safety and quality, I wanted to see if you could explore a little bit more. You've mentioned earlier KPIs. How do you monitor progress? One thing I heard you say was that you do count and monitor the number of implemented ideas, but then how do you trace that through to outcomes in different ways?
Well, that's the beauty of an operating model. And we do have a way, for example, we can tie an implemented idea to cost savings. We've built a system with our finance teams where if there's an idea that is accomplishing either a type 1 or a type 2 savings, and I realize those definitions are different for different organizations, but hard and soft savings, we'll just say here, they can validate those savings. We have a tool that we've developed where the project is in the system, finance validates it, and we can actually take money out of the budget. We don't use budgets anymore. We use more of a dynamic planning and forecasting. But that is how we're able to keep premiums low for our patients. It's one way we're able to do that, is the improvements that we make affect our bottom line, and then we pass that on to our savings. So that's actually a very important one, and it aligns very tightly to the vision of the organization, which is providing the highest quality of care with the best experience possible at the lowest possible cost. So that's one way that we tie these efforts to the ideas. As a matter of fact, this is the first year where we have a watch metric of making this connection of ideas to the savings. And then there are more indirect ways to look at the impact of a system in general with the KPIs, from safety to experience, equity, stewardship. We have several fundamentals that we organize our work under through our strategy deployment process. But while the results are multifactorial in nature, since we've implemented the operating model back in 2017, all of our metrics have made improvement. Even last year during COVID, during the pandemic, all of our metrics improved. And I think in large part, having a system and an operating model that helps us prioritize our work and deploy strategy and align efforts across the organization, that's part of this. So it's not about just the idea, but rather the idea in a greater environment of an operating system that really is the magic.
Mm-hmm. So when you talk about moving away from budgets, you've piqued my interest. That would be a whole conversation in and of itself. Maybe we can do a follow-up episode at some point around like that idea right there might be mind-blowing to some. Wait, we can actually do that? Or they've brought it up and they've been told no?
Actually, this is something we've been toying with for several years, and you're right, we won't have time to get into it, but the idea is, what's your rolling forecast? So where have you been? What's your forecast for the next few months? Let's try to hit your target. And it has turned it on its head a little bit as far as budgeting. But if you look at just the budgeting process in an organization, it takes months and months to accomplish, right? And then you're not very flexible. You can't adapt to situations that change, such as a pandemic, for example. Mm-hmm. So if you're able to be more flexible, you can shift your priorities a little bit and focus on what matters most. And so that's what we've just undertaken here in our organization, is this more flexible dynamic planning process to finance. And then we do hold people accountable. Unit managers have their targets. Everybody has targets. Central entities or the system teams have targets as well. And we monitor those with the dashboard and software, obviously. And what is exciting about this from a continuous improvement standpoint is that this helps us use the operating model to make iterative improvements to what we're trying to do with EBITDA and, with the bottom line as well. Because now we have these shorter cycles of improvement to adapt to. So, but yeah, that's maybe a topic for another day.
All right. Because, it sounds like one other way of summarizing some of the benefits there, if you take all of that time spent, not just in the annual budget planning cycles, but then the review, you could repurpose some of that time into actual improvement.
That's exactly right. And that's our vision for our strategy deployment process as well, actually. Right now, it's on an annual cycle. It needs to be that way because, we're still iterating with it. But my goal is one day in the organization to have quarterly cycles, mm-hmm. where we get down to the leading measures at the unit level more effectively.
Yeah. So maybe one other question to close the loop, Matt. You had mentioned earlier the MBOE program at, I think you're supposed to say the Ohio State University.
The Ohio State University, that's right.
So the MBOE program, Masters of Business and Operational Excellence. Hopefully I have that acronym correct. Back in episode 25, if people want to go back and hear a little bit more about the program, you can do so there. But Matt, you talked about kind of sort of the opportunity to learn or catch up on topics you hadn't been exposed to. How would you summarize what you got from that program as a physician?
Well, as a physician, it was fantastic, and there were several in my cohort actually. But what it did is it took you out of healthcare, and I had done this to some degree because of those that were mentoring me. But we would, as part of our weekly experience, and I believe that the program is still set up the same way, where you go there for a week. We would go to places like Worthington Steel, where they're rolling these giant rolls of steel, and they were putting us out on the floor with helmets, hard hats and steel-toed boots, and we were dissecting processes. Sorry, that's a medical term, I guess, right? But we were breaking down these processes, and that we were making improvements on their shop floor with their team members. And so just to take that the mindset and put it in a different environment is so beneficial, whether it be there or we went to a window shop, went to an insurance company. We went to these different places, and then yes, we also went into healthcare. But after, my mind was trained to see things in a different way. I think that was one of the greatest benefits. The didactic work is obviously great, and I became certified as a black belt in Six Sigma. But I think the most valuable experience was being there with groups of students from all different kinds of backgrounds. So you may be sitting next to someone, like Ryan in my class that worked at a lawnmower manufacturing plant, and then I worked as a physician in healthcare, and we would talk about continuous improvement together. And so it really was a fantastic experience. And then the milestones that you meet along the way to make sure you're meeting the educational requirements obviously are important. But for me, it was about the experience that was just fantastic.
So, as a non-clinician, as an engineer, as somebody on my side here with a manufacturing background, thank you for being open to those experiences and mentors and kind of stretching some of your thinking, but building upon, I think, what was already inside you to help make healthcare better. I'm glad you didn't leave medicine. I'm glad you haven't that you didn't lose the opportunity that you've now seized upon to help make healthcare better, both at Intermountain Healthcare and the influence that your sharing will have beyond that. So thank you for everything that you shared with us here today.
Of course, yeah, it's been my pleasure, Mark, and it's been rewarding. And I guess this may be a last comment, and maybe this is just targeted to physicians, but it can be others. This can change healthcare. What we're doing really can be the solution to the crisis that we're seeing in our country if we're willing to take a step back and look at things through a different lens. And for me personally, it's transformed the way that I see healthcare, the way that I see my patients, the way that I see the world actually. But it really can be an amazing experience. And for me, I pinch myself sometimes when I think of the opportunities that I have to do what I'm doing now and to work with the people that I do, and to be in an organization that is committed to this. It's really a fantastic experience, and I've enjoyed sharing some of these thoughts with you today, Mark. Thank you.
Well, thank you. So great thought to end on. So again, our guest today is Dr. Matt Pollard, Vice President Continuous Improvement at Intermountain Healthcare. We'll put more information and links to some of the work they're doing at Intermountain and the MBOE program in the show notes. So Matt, again, thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, appreciate it, Mark. Thanks.